Today we'll be taking you back in time to the Middle Ages to explore the thrilling world of jousting. Join us as we delve into the history, equipment, and techniques of these medieval knights and get a glimpse into this exciting and dangerous sport. So grab your shield and lance, and let's charge into the arena. During the 13th to 16th century, jousts were an integral part of European medieval tournaments. Knights would demonstrate their martial prowess by riding against each other with wooden lances in a designated area known as the lists. By 1400, the sport of jousting had become known as tilting due to the barrier or tilt that separated the two opponents. Jousting was a great way for knights to show off their heraldic designs, put on a show, and make a good impression on the aristocratic ladies who might reward them with a scarf or veil. By the end of the Middle Ages, jousting had become less popular, but it experienced brief resurgences up to the 19th century. Mock cavalry battles, in which knights aimed to capture as many of the opposing team as possible, likely originated in France during the 11th century. During the next century, the trend had become popular throughout Europe. Celebrations like weddings or coronations could include tournaments that spanned multiple days. Refreshment stalls, horse sellers, and vendors of fine clothing were present, and the event featured intermission drummer performances with accompanying musicians and acrobats, pageantry, and multiple banquets. From the 11th century, jousting had been a minor side event of tournaments, but it became more popular in the second half of the 13th century. The term joust may have come from the Latin word juxta, and this activity may have been created in response to the increased importance placed on chivalry and honor during the later Middle Ages. Displaying one's talents in an individual performance in front of an audience was much simpler than the chaotic free-for-all that occurred throughout the countryside. Those who wished to compete as a knight had to demonstrate martial abilities and etiquette, and anyone with a criminal past or a disreputable character was not allowed to participate. Tournaments evolved into grand spectacles full of pomp and ceremony, and knights were required to show proof of their ancestry to compete. To do so, they displayed their family's coat of arms on their shield, surcoat, and horse's coat. At jousts, women were often in attendance and sometimes even sponsored the tournament. As a sign of favor, they would give certain items, known as favors, to knights they favored, such as a veil, which was then tied around the receiver's lance. Spectators, including the ladies, observed the event from purpose-built stands, pavilions with balconies, or tents. On occasion, knights disguised themselves as renowned characters like King Arthur, adversaries like the Saracens, religious figures such as monks, and even noblewomen. At the Round Table gathering, the knights acted out roles from the tales of King Arthur, making it a particularly memorable event. When two armies were at a truce or siege, knights would often joust to pass the time, although the consequences could be fatal. Examples of these sudden contests of skill and strength can be found in Sicily in 1062, Würzburg in 1127, Rennes in 1357, and multiple times during the English-Scots Wars in the 14th century. The primary weapon utilized was a lance, which was approximately 2 meters in length. The lance was crafted to be hollow so that it would break apart upon impact, minimizing potential harm. In order to reduce the number of fatalities, lances were equipped with a 3- or 4-pointed head to reduce the force of impact, and swords were made blunted. These weapons were referred to as arms of courtesy or applaisance. There were also occasions where two opponents fought with deadly weapons and vowed to keep battling until one was seriously injured or killed. Beginning in the 14th century, a vamplate was added to the lance to protect the hand that held it. Initially, the vamplate was circular in shape, but eventually evolved to become conical. During the 15th century, the lance was crafted to be thinner at the handle. A leather strap could be worn around the upper arm to stop the lance from slipping back when making contact with an adversary. The potential for harm was considerable during the regular event, and it was recommended that people practice extensively. To help sharpen lancing abilities, many people used a quintain, a device consisting of a rotating arm with a shield at one end and a weight at the other. The knight had to strike the shield and keep galloping forward in order to avoid being struck from behind by the shield's momentum as it rotated. To give an additional boost of enthusiasm, the shield was sometimes fashioned into the likeness of a Saracen brandishing a sword. On the night before a tournament, it was common for novice knights to hold their own jousting competitions. When two knights were on horseback, swords were rarely used. However, if one knight was dismounted, the other would also dismount, and the two could engage in hand-to-hand combat if desired. Swords were long and double-edged, featuring a crossguard to guard the hand. They were usually too heavy to be wielded with one hand, and required two hands to be swung effectively for a prolonged period of time. Instead of swords, maces could be used. In the 13th century, jousters wore both padded linen and leather armor for tournaments. However, when plate armor became more popular for battle in the 14th century, jousters also began wearing it. Generally, armor used in battle was modified for tournaments, with areas that were likely to be struck being reinforced with an additional metal plate, and a heavy steel gauntlet for the lance hand, and a visor with a grill for the helmet. The frog-mouth helmet was a particularly favored style of headgear among knights. It featured a horizontal slit for vision, but it was so slim that the knight would have to tilt their head forward to see out of it. This was beneficial, as it meant that their eyes were automatically shielded when they held their head up. By the late 15th century, helmets were being attached to the breast and back armor using screws to ensure that they stayed in place if they were hit. Tournaments often featured helmets that were decorated extravagantly with feathers, crests, horns, and sculptures. Shields were typically constructed of wood and leather, with iron elements providing extra reinforcement. The shape and size of shields changed over time. The size of a shield can vary from a classic, round shape to a more elongated or rectangular one. In order to rest the lance, some shields had a top corner that was cut out. A strap was sometimes used to attach the shield to the shoulder to prevent it from dropping when it was hit. During the 15th century, knights would wear protective padding in the shape of a pear to cushion any impacts to the shield they held in front of them. A chest protector, either padded or metal, was often used to safeguard horses, and it was hung around their necks. A metal plate was often used to protect the head, while the eyes were usually shielded. The design of saddles was altered to include a higher back, allowing knights to remain in the saddle when hit by an adversary's lance. In the 14th century, saddles were designed with curved elements to shield the rider's legs from potential injury, which could otherwise be guarded by shin guards. By the late 14th century, knights had begun to wear a lance rest as part of their breastplate armor to provide extra stability for their lance. The region where knights competed in jousts was referred to as the lists, a rectangular area that was often covered with sand or straw. The field spanned a distance of 100 to 200 meters. As early as the 15th century, a wooden barrier was placed between two knights on the battlefield, preventing them from colliding head-on. The tilt, which originated in Italy and replaced the former simple rope, was approximately 6 feet in height. The two riders began from opposite sides of the field, galloping towards one another. With their lances, they aimed to strike the other's chest, throat, or helmet, which was typically powerful enough to unseat them from their horse. In later tournaments, the goal was to strike the shield of the other knight. During the early 15th century, mechanical shields were used that would shatter when struck, providing a visual indication of which combatant had initiated the attack. On many occasions, lances were designed to break upon impact for safety reasons, and when this happened, the knight's squire would supply him with a replacement. 3 lances were typically provided, and then sword combat on foot could ensue. As jousting became safer, the size of the field was decreased and the protective gear worn by the knights became more ornate, featuring lighter armor, decorative crests, and vibrant shields. Removing their helmet was a sign that a knight was no longer interested in fighting. Participating in practice jousts was a risky endeavor, as evidenced by the death of John de Hastings, Earl of Pembroke, who suffered a fatal groin injury in 1390. On some occasions, the competitive drive was taken too far. Roger de Libourne, a knight noted by the 13th century chronicler Mather, is said to have slain his rival Arnold de Montigny with a lance thrust to the neck. As time went on, jousting shifted from being a game of knocking one's opponent off their horse to a game that was based on scoring points. Rules were created that awarded points for the number of broken lances or strikes to specific areas of the body, such as the visor. Prizes may be taken away if a horse was struck, an opponent was hit in the back, or if the same person barged into the tilt 3 times. The victorious competitor in a joust was rewarded with a variety of prizes, ranging from a gold crown or a fine sword to a horse or falcon. Other, less tangible rewards included a kiss or garter from a certain lady and the adoration of the spectators and fellow knights. Beginning in the 16th century, horsemanship was more highly valued than jousting skills, and engaging in combat on foot, sometimes with a low fence between opponents, became a more popular choice than jousting. The sport of jousting was greatly diminished in its appeal when Henry II, the ruler of France, passed away in a jousting match in 1559. His death was caused by a splinter from a broken lance which pierced his visor. Although tournaments were still held occasionally in certain nations, usually as a way to commemorate royal occasions, these revivals in the 19th century lacked the same significance as before, since the era of chivalry and knighthood had already ended. Thanks for joining us for today's look at medieval jousting. We hope you enjoyed learning about this fascinating aspect of medieval history. If you'd like to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Until next time, farewell, and may the best knight win.